This story delves into intense psychological pressure and the chilling unknown, exploring themes that some listeners may find unsettling. The world outside Michael Hayes' window was a canvas of deep, impenetrable black, punctuated only by the distant glittering sprawl of city lights. Inside, the operations center at Consolidated Air Traffic Control was a universe of its own. A low hum of machinery, the soft click of keyboards, the hushed, focused voices of controllers guiding invisible threads of humanity through the night sky. For Michael, a veteran of 15 years, the rhythm of this place was as familiar as his own heartbeat. He knew the ebb and flow, the sudden surges of activity, the stretches of quiet monotony. Tonight, it had been a quiet night, almost unnervingly so, until 2:17 a.m. That's when Transglobal Flight 714, a Boeing 787 Dreamliner carrying 256 souls, began its descent into the impossible. Michael remembered the flight perfectly. He'd taken over its handoff from the sector to his east about 40 minutes prior. TG 714, on its transatlantic leg from London, was a massive, beautiful bird, currently cruising at 37,000 feet, just starting its long, gentle arc towards its final destination, Kennedy International Airport. Captain David Miller, a voice Michael recognized from countless previous flights, had been calm, professional, and utterly routine. Consolidated, Transglobal 714, maintaining 37,000, beginning initial descent in approximately 15 minutes, over. Michael had responded, his own voice a practiced monotone. Transglobal 714, Consolidated, Roger. Maintain 37,000. Expect vectors for approach in about 20. Good night, Captain. Good night, Consolidated. 714 out. That was the last communication. The last normal communication, at least. For the next 10 minutes, TG 714 was a solid, unwavering green icon on Michael's primary radar screen. A digital heartbeat, strong and true, in the vast dark. He watched it, not with intense focus. It was just another flight in a sky full of them, but with the casual awareness of a guardian. He was charting its course, ensuring its separation from other traffic, mentally preparing for its next set of instructions. He even leaned back in his chair for a moment, stretching his shoulders, his eyes still scanning the array of data before him. Then it flickered. A microscopic stutter in the green icon's steady progress. Not a complete disappearance, not yet. Just a tiny, almost imperceptible hesitation. Michael leaned forward, a frown creasing his brow. Equipment glitches happened. Sometimes a momentary loss of data, a radar bounce, a blip. It was rare but not unheard of. He watched, waiting for it to stabilize, to resume its smooth, unwavering track. It didn't. Instead, the flicker intensified. The green icon, representing hundreds of tons of metal and human lives, began to fragment. It was like watching a digital image pixelate and dissolve, not into static but into nothingness. Michael's breath hitched. He knew with a cold certainty that seeped into his bones that this wasn't a glitch in the traditional sense. A glitch usually resolved itself or at least left a trace, a ghost of a signal. This was different. This was erasure. Transglobal 714 Consolidated, he said, his voice sharper now, cutting through the low hum of the room. He reached for his headset, adjusting it tighter. Transglobal 714, confirm altitude and position. Do you read? Silence. Not radio static. Not a crackle of interference. Just absolute profound silence. The kind of silence that screams. On his screen, the green icon, once so robust, was now a faint shimmering outline. It looked like a dying ember, flickering one last time before extinguishing completely. And then it was gone. Vanished. Not a trace, not a blip, not a single digital whisper. The space where Transglobal Flight 714 had been was now just empty. Dark grid lines on a radar screen. Michael's hand trembled as he pressed the transmit button again, his voice rising in urgency. Transglobal 714, this is Consolidated. Do you copy? Anyone on Transglobal 714? Please respond immediately. Still nothing. Only the deafening silence of a vacant frequency. His eyes darted to the secondary radar, the transponder data, which relied on the aircraft itself sending out a signal. That too was blank. The flight number, the altitude, the speed, all gone. It was as if the plane had never existed, wiped clean from the digital map of the sky. A cold sweat broke out on Michael's forehead. He felt a sudden dizzying rush of adrenaline mixed with pure unadulterated dread. This wasn't a power outage. This wasn't a software bug. This was a fully loaded passenger jet, one that had been flying perfectly normally moments before, disappearing without a single distress call, without so much as a whisper of trouble. It had simply ceased to be. He looked up, his gaze sweeping across the control room. Other controllers, immersed in their own sectors, hadn't noticed. Not yet. Their screens were alive with their own flights, their own responsibilities. But Michael knew. He knew what he had just seen, or rather what he had stopped seeing. "Jessica," he called out, his voice hoarse, turning to his supervisor, Jessica Riley, who was overseeing the sector from a few positions down. Jessica was sharp, calm under pressure, a rock. But the look on Michael's face must have conveyed the sheer terror of the moment, because she immediately turned, her eyes narrowing with concern. "What's up, Michael?" she asked, her voice even but with a hint of inquiry. He pointed a shaking finger at his screen, at the empty space where TG 714 should have been. Trans-Global 714. It's gone. Just vanished. No distress, no nothing. One second it was there. The next it wasn't. Jessica's eyes went wide. She moved quickly, abandoning her own console, and came to stand beside him, peering at his screen. She typed in the flight number, ran a quick query. The system returned nothing. No active flight. No recent data. It was like trying to find a ripple in water that had already settled. "Run a full system check," she commanded, her voice now tight with an urgency that matched his own. "Ping all adjacent radar sites. Check with oceanic control. See if anyone else has a trace." Michael was already doing it, his fingers flying across the keyboard, his brain racing through every protocol, every emergency procedure he'd ever been trained on. He tried the secondary frequency, then the emergency frequency. He called out again, his voice echoing in the sudden, growing silence of the room. Other controllers now looked up, alerted by the change in tone, the sudden edge of panic in Michael's voice. They saw Jessica's grim face, Michael's frantic movements, and the empty space on his screen. The low hum of the control room began to take on a different resonance, a deeper, more unsettling chord. "Nothing," Michael reported, his voice barely a whisper. "No response. No transponder. No primary radar return from any adjacent sectors. It's like it dropped off the face of the earth." Jessica bit her lip, her gaze fixed on the blank screen. "That's impossible," she murmured, but the conviction in her voice was thin, almost non-existent. She knew, just as Michael did, that impossible things sometimes happened. But a fully functional modern passenger jet, disappearing without a single warning, without a single trace, in the middle of a clear night, was beyond anything they had ever encountered. It defied every law of aviation, every piece of technology, every logical explanation. The implications hit Michael like a physical blow. 256 people. Families, dreams, futures. All gone in an instant. And he, Michael Hayes, the man whose job it was to keep them safe, had watched it happen. He had seen the green icon flicker, fragment, and then wink out of existence, leaving behind only the terrifying, unanswerable question. What just happened to Trans-Global Flight 714? And more chillingly, what didn't happen? No explosion, no sudden plunge, no chaotic last words. Just a silent, absolute disappearance. The void stretched out before him, a terrifying, unknowable expanse, and he knew with a sickening lurch in his gut that his life and the lives of everyone in that control room would never be the same again. The search had already begun, but there was nothing to search for. There was only the gaping, horrifying absence. The gaping, horrifying absence. The immediate aftermath was a blur of blaring alarms, frantic shouting, and the chilling realization that a ghost had just flown through their airspace. Supervisors, their faces ashen, stormed the control room, demanding answers Michael couldn't give. The red phone, reserved for emergencies, rang incessantly, connecting them to military command, federal aviation authorities, and eventually the NTSB. The air was thick with a desperate, almost primal energy, as if the collective will of every person in that room could somehow conjure Flight 828 back into existence. Michael sat frozen, his headset still clamped to his ears, the ghost of Captain Thompson's voice echoing in his mind. He was pulled away from his console, his seat quickly taken by a relief controller, but the images on the screen, the empty airspace, remained seared into his vision. The room was a whirlwind of controlled panic. People moved with a frantic purpose, their voices hushed but urgent. He overheard snippets. Search and rescue deployed. No distress signal. Zero debris. Each fragment of information was another hammer blow to the fragile wall of his sanity. How could a Boeing 737 carrying 180 souls simply cease to exist? His perfect record, his years of flawless service, meant nothing in the face of this impossible event. He was the last one to speak to them, the last one to see them, and now he was the first line of inquiry. He was led into a small windowless office, the sterile walls doing little to calm the storm raging inside him. His initial debriefing was a torrent of questions, each designed to find a crack in his memory, a fault in his procedure, a human error that could explain the inexplicable. He recounted every detail, every word, every blip on the screen, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. He swore repeatedly that there was nothing, no warning, no anomaly, just the sudden brutal void. Within hours, the control tower transformed from a bustling nerve center into a sterile crime scene. Uniformed officers guarded entrances, and a team of grim-faced federal investigators descended like vultures. Leading them was David Miller, a man whose reputation preceded him within aviation circles. Miller was NTSB, but his demeanor suggested a blend of seasoned detective and weary philosopher. He had seen every type of aviation disaster, from mechanical failures to pilot error, but the quiet intensity in his eyes signaled that this one was different. He moved with a quiet authority, his gaze sweeping over the console, the screens, and finally settling on Michael. Miller was methodical. He didn't shout, didn't accuse. He simply asked Michael to walk him through the entire sequence, from initial contact to the final chilling disappearance. He made Michael replay the radar footage frame by excruciating frame. Michael watched himself, a younger, more confident version of himself, guiding the plane, oblivious to the impending horror. He saw the blip, clear and strong, then the final instantaneous vanishing. Miller leaned closer, his finger hovering over the screen. And you saw nothing else, Michael? No interference, no other aircraft, no weather anomalies. Michael shook his head, his throat tight. Nothing, sir. Just gone. But even as the words left his mouth, a tiny, almost imperceptible detail nagged at him. He'd replayed that moment 1,000 times in his mind, dissecting every microsecond, and each time a flicker, a brief, almost digital distortion, like a ripple across water, right before the target vanished. Not a static drop, but a momentary, impossible blur on the screen itself, lasting less than a heartbeat. He hadn't mentioned it in his initial terrified debriefing, dismissing it as a stress-induced hallucination, a trick of the light in his periphery. But now, under David Miller's piercing gaze, the image was sharp, undeniable. Yet he still said nothing. It felt too insignificant, too surreal, to mention amidst the monumental reality of a vanished plane. The search efforts were unprecedented. Coast Guard cutters, military aircraft, and civilian vessels scoured thousands of square miles of ocean. The supposed flight path was analyzed, mapped, and remapped. Every piece of satellite data, every ping from other aircraft in the vicinity, every weather report was scrutinized. Days turned into a week, then two. The media frenzy was relentless, a voracious beast feeding on speculation and fear. Experts offered theories ranging from catastrophic structural failure to acts of terrorism, but none could explain the absolute, utter lack of evidence. No oil slick, no floating debris, no life rafts, no bodies. It was as if Flight 828 had never carried a single passenger, never been constructed from metal and wire, never existed in the first place. Michael was placed on administrative leave, sent home with instructions to rest, but rest was an alien concept. Sleep offered no escape, only vivid nightmares of falling planes and silent screams. He found himself obsessively reviewing his own recordings, listening to his voice, calm and professional, then the sudden tremor as the realization hit. He'd rewind, fast forward, desperate to find something, anything he might have missed. He even pulled up old radar training simulations, trying to replicate the exact conditions, to see if a system glitch could somehow create such a disappearance. But the simulations always offered a logical explanation. A system crash, a power failure, a known blind spot. None of them resulted in a clean, absolute erasure. His apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the incessant ringing of his phone, journalists, concerned colleagues, even distant relatives hoping for some shred of inside information. He ignored them all. The weight of 180 lives, and the impossible mystery, pressed down on him, crushing his spirit. He felt a profound, irrational guilt. He had done everything right, followed every protocol, yet the plane was gone. He was the last link to it, and that link had snapped. One evening, staring blankly at the television, a news anchor delivered the official update. After 2 weeks of intensive search efforts, officials confirmed that no trace of Flight 828 or its 180 passengers and crew has been found. The National Transportation Safety Board, alongside federal agencies, states that the disappearance remains without explanation. The words hung in the air, cold and final. Without explanation. It was a terrifying admission, a crack in the very foundation of their understanding of the world. Planes didn't just vanish. He felt a deep chill, colder than the air conditioning. He knew the truth was far more unsettling than any of the theories being floated. This wasn't an accident, or an act of terror, or even a system malfunction. This was something else. Something that defied every law of physics, every piece of human logic. He walked over to his console, the one he had at home for his hobby, and pulled up the archived radar data from that night, the raw, unadulterated feed. He zoomed in, focusing on the coordinates, the exact moment. And there it was again, unmistakable this time, now that he was looking for it. That brief, almost imperceptible flicker, a ripple in the digital display, just before the blip winked out of existence. It was so subtle, so fleeting, that it could easily be dismissed as a momentary anomaly, a ghost in the machine. But he knew it wasn't. The phone rang, startling him. It was David Miller. "Michael," Miller's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "We've got something. Not much, but enough to make this even stranger. The black boxes, they're gone. Every single one of them. No ping, no signal, no trace of the emergency locator transmitters. It's like they never existed. And that isn't just a plane disappearing, Michael. That's a plane that was never there to begin with. Or more terrifyingly, a plane that was erased." The words hung in the air, a chilling pronouncement that echoed not just in Michael's ear, but deep within his very bones. Erased. The implication was a physical blow, stealing the breath from his lungs. For a moment, he could only stare blankly at the wall of monitors, the familiar green lines now twisting into an incomprehensible nightmare. "Jessica," he finally managed, his voice a strained whisper. "What are you talking about? What do you mean erased? Planes don't just cease to exist." Jessica's reply was grim, heavy with a resignation that terrified him more than any shout. "I mean exactly what I said, Michael. Every database, every logged communication, every flight plan. It's all there. For Flight 111. Up until its departure. And then nothing. It's like the system itself has no record of it ever being airborne. No radar track, no transponder squawk, no distress call from any frequency. The military's long-range radar, our own primary and secondary systems, even the satellite imagery from that window, nothing. It's a phantom." Michael swallowed hard, the metallic taste of fear coating his tongue. He gripped the edge of his console, knuckles white. "But I spoke to them. I cleared them for takeoff. I watched them climb out of my sector. I remember the pilot's voice, the call sign, the destination. It was Flight 111 to Seattle. Captain David Miller. I remember his voice clear as day." "Your logs confirm your initial contact, Michael," Jessica conceded, her voice softening slightly. "And your clearance for departure. That part is undeniable. But every subsequent interaction, every handoff, every radar return you swear you saw. There's no official corroboration. Just you. Your word against nothing." The silence that followed was suffocating. It wasn't just a plane. It was hundreds of lives. Families. Dreams. And he was the last point of contact, the last thread in a tapestry that had been violently, impossibly unraveled. His mind raced, desperately trying to find a flaw, a logical explanation, anything to anchor himself back to reality. A glitch? A system-wide error? But Jessica's certainty, the sheer scale of the missing data, crushed those hopes. The next few hours blurred into a surreal, nightmarish interrogation. The FAA arrived first, their faces grim, their questions sharp and pointed. Then the NTSB, followed by men and women in dark suits who introduced themselves only as federal agents. Michael was led away from his console, his headset still warm from his ears, his shift abruptly, spectacularly over. He was taken to a sterile conference room, the air thick with tension and the smell of stale coffee. They wanted to know everything. Every detail of his shift, every communication, every flicker on his screen. He recounted the events with painstaking accuracy, his voice hoarse, his memory a hyper-focused lens on those critical minutes. He described the clear weather, the routine departure, the pilot's calm voice. He described seeing Flight 111 on his scope, a distinct blip with a data tag climbing steadily. He described the moment it vanished, the sudden, impossible void in its place. They recorded his statement, cross-referenced it with his colleagues' logs, which, infuriatingly, showed no record of Flight 111 entering their sectors. They pulled his personal records, his psychological evaluations, his performance reviews. They even questioned his coffee consumption, his sleep patterns, his family life. Every aspect of his existence was laid bare, dissected, scrutinized for any hint of instability, any crack in his composure that could explain away the inexplicable. Mr. Thompson, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, who introduced herself as Agent Emily Carter from the NTSB, pressed him, her voice calm but penetrating. "You are aware that your account is currently the only existing record of this aircraft's continued flight after initial takeoff clearance. Every other system, every other controller, every other piece of data we have access to indicates that Flight 111 never truly departed our airspace. It simply stopped existing." Michael stared at her, exhaustion warring with a desperate need to be believed. "I know what I saw, Agent Carter. I know what I heard. I've been doing this for 15 years. I don't hallucinate planes. I don't invent conversations. Captain Miller cleared with me. He was on frequency. He existed." Agent Carter leaned forward, her expression unreadable. "We are not suggesting you fabricated anything, Mr. Thompson. We are simply trying to understand how such a profound discrepancy can occur. A commercial airliner, hundreds of passengers, vanishing without a trace, without a single piece of debris, without a single signal. It's unprecedented. And the only consistent variable in this entire anomaly is your testimony." The implication hung heavy. He was either crazy or he was involved. Neither thought brought him any comfort. He felt a cold dread begin to seep into his bones, a feeling that went beyond the shock of the missing plane. He was being isolated, his reality questioned, his sanity slowly eroded by the sheer impossibility of the situation. Hours turned into what felt like days. They showed him radar playback frame by agonizing frame. He pointed to the spot where he'd seen the blip, the data tag, but on their screens there was nothing. Just empty airspace where his memory insisted a Boeing 737 had been. It was like looking at a photograph where a crucial detail had been expertly airbrushed out, leaving only a blank space. "See," Agent Carter said gently, pointing to a specific timestamp. "At this precise moment where you claim to have seen Flight 111, our system shows only a smaller private aircraft, designated N475 Delta. It was cleared to cross the departure path of what should have been Flight 111, but its flight path was clear. No conflict. No other traffic." Michael squinted at the screen. He remembered N475 Delta. He had cleared it, but he also distinctly remembered Flight 111 higher on its own trajectory. "No, that's not right. There were two. N475 Delta was below 111, on a different heading. I had them separated." Agent Carter sighed, a small, weary sound. "Mr. Thompson, our primary radar, our secondary radar, the military's long-range systems, even the raw data logs from the airport tower itself, they all show the same thing. N475 Delta, and nothing else in that specific airspace at that specific altitude and time." He felt a tremor of panic. Was he losing his mind? Had the stress of the job finally broken him? But the memory was so vivid, so real. He could almost hear the faint hum of the aircraft over the radio, the distinct tone of Captain Miller's voice. They kept him there, questioning him, replaying the same footage, probing at his memories, until the first rays of dawn filtered through the blinds. He was exhausted, disoriented, and utterly alone in his conviction. As he finally stumbled out of the conference room, granted a temporary leave of absence for psychiatric evaluation, he felt a deep, unsettling conviction solidify within him. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a glitch. Someone or something had meticulously, clinically, erased a commercial airliner from existence. And they had made sure he was the only one who remembered it. He drove home in a daze, the city lights blurring around him. Every street sign, every billboard, seemed to mock his deteriorating grip on reality. When he finally unlocked his apartment door, the silence within was deafening. He poured himself a glass of water, his hands shaking. His phone buzzed. It was Jessica. "Michael," she said, her voice low, urgent. "I know you're probably going through hell, but I just found something. Something small, something almost imperceptible, buried deep in an archived backup of the flight plan system. It's a timestamp anomaly, a single 1-second discrepancy in the departure time for Flight 111. It's logged as departing at 2 hours 17 minutes and 34 seconds, but then, a fraction of a second later, the system overwrites it, changing it back to 2 hours 17 minutes and 33 seconds. Just 1 second. It's almost certainly a ghost in the machine, a micro-corruption, but it's there. And it's the only thing I've found that even remotely suggests a manual alteration to any data related to that flight." Michael's heart pounded. A manual alteration. A single second. It was a thread, impossibly thin, in a suffocating web of nothingness. "Jessica," he breathed, "can you isolate that? Can you track it? See who accessed it?" "I'm trying," she replied, her voice strained. "But it's deep, and whatever did it, it covered its tracks. It's like a phantom edit. It's not a person, Michael. It's a program, a very sophisticated one, and if I didn't know better, I'd say it was designed to create a perfect, undetectable illusion, to make something appear, and then disappear without leaving a trace." He looked around his apartment, the familiar walls suddenly feeling alien, threatening. An illusion. A perfect, undetectable illusion. But why? Who would go to such lengths? And what was the purpose of such a terrifying, elaborate deception? He felt a chilling certainty wash over him. This wasn't just about a missing plane anymore. This was about him. He was the witness. He was the anomaly. And now he had a single impossible second. A phantom edit that hinted at a truth far more sinister than a simple accident. He had to find out what that second meant. Because whatever had erased Flight 111, it was still out there. And it knew he remembered. Michael's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat echoing the terrifying realization. It knew he remembered. The thought sent a chill far colder than the air conditioning through his bones. This wasn't just a glitch, not a hallucination. Someone or something had deliberately removed Flight 111, and then, almost as an afterthought, tried to erase Michael's memory of the erasure. But they'd failed. He remembered that impossible second, that phantom edit. And now he was a target. He couldn't go to HR. He couldn't go to his supervisor, Mark. He'd sound like a madman. A man buckling under the pressure of a catastrophic event. "I saw a plane disappear, then reappear, then vanish again, and I think someone made it happen." That was a one-way ticket to a psych evaluation and an early retirement. No, Michael had to find proof, undeniable proof, before he breathed a word to anyone in authority. His first step was obvious: the recordings. Every second of radar data, every word of radio transmission, was meticulously logged and archived. He had to go back frame by frame, audio clip by audio clip, and find that impossible second. He waited until his shift was over, the fluorescent lights of the control center casting long, sterile shadows. He clocked out, his movements stiff, his mind racing. Instead of heading home, he took a detour, his old sedan cutting through the late-night traffic until he reached a familiar, unassuming office building in a less-trafficked industrial park. David Miller was a relic, a brilliant but eccentric software engineer Michael had known since college. David ran a small, independent data forensics firm, mostly dealing with corporate espionage and digital recovery. He was the kind of guy who saw the world in lines of code and believed every digital footprint, no matter how small, told a story. Michael trusted David implicitly, not just with his secrets but with his sanity. The bell above the door chimed softly as Michael entered David's dimly lit office. The air smelled of stale coffee and ozone. David, a perpetually rumpled man with a wild mane of brown hair and glasses perched on the end of his nose, looked up from a glowing monitor, his eyes magnified behind the thick lenses. "Michael, what are you doing here at almost midnight?" David said, pushing his glasses up. "Everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse, David. Much worse," Michael replied, sinking into a worn armchair. He recounted the events of the past few days, from the initial disappearance of Flight 111 to the horrifying clarity of his memory replay. He spoke of the impossible second, the phantom edit, the feeling of being watched. He left nothing out, searching David's face for any sign of disbelief. David listened, not interrupting, his expression unreadable. When Michael finished, the silence in the room stretched, punctuated only by the hum of servers. "So you're saying," David began slowly, "that a commercial airliner full of people was not only removed from radar, but that someone or something then tried to manipulate your perception, your memory of that event, to cover it up?" "Exactly," Michael said, a desperate hope clinging to David's calm demeanor. David leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin. "That's a lot, Michael. A lot to process. But if anyone could manipulate a system like that, it would take an incredible level of sophistication, resources, and access. We're talking about a Black Ops level of operation, or something even more out there." "I know how it sounds," Michael interjected, his voice raw. "But I saw it, David. Felt it. And I know it's real." "Okay," David said, his voice surprisingly steady. "Let's assume for a moment that you're right. That this isn't stress or trauma playing tricks. What do you need from me?" "The recordings," Michael said. "The radar data, the audio logs, everything from that sector, that exact time. I need to go through it frame by frame. But I can't do it on the official systems. If someone's watching, they'll know I'm digging." David nodded. "Smart. They'd have access to system logs, monitoring who accesses what. You'd leave a digital breadcrumb trail a mile wide." He paused, tapping his fingers on the desk. "Getting raw data from ATC servers without official clearance. That's tricky. Highly secure. But not impossible. I have a few contacts, old colleagues who used to work for some of the contractors that built those systems. They might have a backdoor, or at least know where the less monitored archives are kept. It'll take time, and it won't be cheap. I don't care about the cost. Just get it," Michael urged. "I'll figure out how to pay you back." "Don't worry about that now," David said, waving a hand dismissively. "First, let's see if there's anything to find. If this phantom edit exists, it would have to leave some kind of trace. A corrupted packet, a timestamp anomaly, a checksum error. Something. Even the most sophisticated digital manipulation leaves a signature, however faint." Over the next few days, Michael lived in a blur of anxiety and clandestine meetings. He went to work, performing his duties with a practiced calm that belied the turmoil raging inside him. He avoided eye contact with Mark, with Jessica, with anyone who might notice the dark circles under his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands. Every phone call felt like an intrusion, every strange car on his street a potential threat. He started taking different routes to work, checking his rearview mirror constantly. The feeling of being watched was a constant, suffocating presence. David, meanwhile, was a ghost working in the shadows. He communicated with Michael only through encrypted messages, short, cryptic updates. Working on it. Found a lead on an old backup server. Might have an entry point. Finally, a week after Flight 111 vanished, Michael received a text from David. "Got it. Come to the office. Bring coffee. Lots of coffee." Michael arrived at David's office to find a makeshift command center. 3 monitors glowed in the darkened room, displaying complex grids of data, audio waveforms, and what looked like raw radar outputs. David, looking even more disheveled than usual, was hunched over a keyboard, his fingers flying. "It wasn't easy," David said, not looking up. "This data is heavily encrypted, multi-layered. Took me a while to peel back the layers. And as I suspected, the primary archives are clean. Pristine. No anomalies. Nothing that would suggest a plane just vanished." Michael's heart sank. "So I was wrong? It was just my mind playing tricks." David finally turned, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Hold on, Michael. I said the primary archives. The ones they want you to see. But these systems, they often have redundant backups, legacy servers, sometimes even shadow copies that aren't meant to be easily accessed or audited. I managed to tap into one of those. An old, forgotten server that stores raw, uncompressed data before it goes through the filtering and processing for official logs." He gestured to one of the monitors. "This is it. The raw, unfiltered radar feed for your sector, timestamped to the millisecond, from the moment Flight 111 was declared missing. And this," he pointed to another screen, "is the corresponding raw audio feed." Michael leaned in, his breath catching in his throat. This was it. The moment of truth. David began playing the radar data. a rapid succession of green blips moving across the screen. Flight 111 was there, a steady, confident presence. Michael watched, his eyes narrowed, searching for the impossible. David fast-forwarded through the uneventful minutes, then slowed it down as they approached the critical time. The blip representing Flight 111 was still there. Then, for a fraction of a second, it seemed to flicker. Not disappear, not vanish, but flicker like a glitch in an old video game. And in that same impossible fraction of a second, a faint, almost imperceptible data corruption appeared on the edge of the screen. A tiny cluster of scrambled pixels that immediately resolved themselves. "There!" Michael gasped, pointing a trembling finger. "Did you see that? The flicker? And that little burst of static on the side?" David rewound, then played it again, this time in ultra-slow motion. The flicker was undeniable. The data corruption, a ghostly smear of digital noise, was also visible, lasting for less than a single frame. "You're right," David murmured, his voice laced with awe. "It's there. So subtle, so fast it would be dismissed as a minor transmission error by anyone not looking for it. But it's a signature, Michael. A digital fingerprint." He then switched to the audio feed, playing the raw, unfiltered transmission from Michael's console. They heard Michael's voice, calm and professional, giving instructions. Then, the moment he called for Flight 111 and received no response. But just before that, in the critical fraction of a second when the radar blip flickered, there was a faint, high-pitched whine embedded in the audio, almost subliminal. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, swallowed by the static of an open mic. "The whine," Michael whispered, remembering the strange sensation, the fleeting disorientation he'd felt. "I remember that. I thought it was just feedback." "It's not feedback, Michael," David said, his voice grim. "It's a frequency. A very specific, very high-frequency burst. And it's perfectly synchronized with the radar flicker and the data corruption. Someone didn't just remove Flight 111. They hit it with something. Something that caused a momentary, localized disruption across multiple systems. Something that could make a plane vanish and make you forget it ever happened." The implications hit Michael with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just a cover-up. This was an attack. A weapon capable of not just erasing a plane, but manipulating perception itself. And the fact that they'd gone to such lengths to hide it, to erase the memory of it, meant that whatever had happened to Flight 111, it was far more terrifying than a simple accident. It was deliberate. And he had just found the first undeniable proof. The phantom edit wasn't a trick of his mind. It was a scar, a wound in the fabric of reality. And now, whoever had inflicted that wound knew he was poking at it. The stakes had just been raised exponentially. Michael felt a cold dread bloom in his stomach, spreading through his veins like ice. The realization wasn't just intellectual, it was visceral. He wasn't just a man uncovering a secret. He was now a target. The quiet hum of his desktop computer, usually a comforting backdrop to his late-night research, now felt like a buzzing wire, alive with unseen currents. Every shadow in his apartment seemed deeper, every creak of the old building more ominous. He pushed back from his desk, the chair scraping loudly on the hardwood floor, a sound that made him jump. His eyes darted around the room, searching for what he didn't know. A hidden camera? A listening device? The world had suddenly shifted from a place of predictable physics to a labyrinth of unseen eyes and unheard whispers. He needed to secure the recording. This was his only tangible proof, the anchor in a sea of impossible questions. He fumbled with the external hard drive, his fingers trembling slightly as he disconnected it. He couldn't leave it here. Not now. He had to hide it somewhere no one would ever think to look, a place that was both obvious and completely invisible. His mind raced, discarding ideas as quickly as they formed. Under the mattress? Too cliché. In the freezer? Too prone to damage. His gaze fell on an old, dusty box of college textbooks in the back of his closet. Engineering textbooks, dense and forgotten. Perfect. He tucked the hard drive deep within the pages of a calculus textbook, then shoved the box back behind a pile of old clothes. It wasn't foolproof, but it was better than leaving it exposed. The next few days were a blur of heightened senses and gnawing paranoia. Every car that slowed near his apartment building, every stranger who lingered a moment too long in his periphery, became a potential threat. He found himself constantly checking his rearview mirror, convinced he was being followed. He started taking circuitous routes to work, doubling back, making sudden turns, trying to flesh out any tale. Yet, he never saw anyone definitive, only the lingering sensation of being observed, a prickling on the back of his neck that refused to dissipate. He tried to act normal at work, but the effort was exhausting. Jessica noticed. "You look like you haven't slept, Michael," she said one morning, her brow furrowed with concern. "Everything okay?" He forced a smile. "Just a rough night. Too much coffee, I guess." He hated lying to her, especially now, when he felt so utterly alone. But how could he explain? "Hey, Jessica," he began, then hesitated. Have you ever felt like something impossible happened, but you were the only one who remembered it?" Jessica paused, her hand on her headset. "Like a dream you can't shake?" "Sure, sometimes." "Why?" He shook his head, the words catching in his throat. Sounded absurd even to him. "No, not a dream. More like a glitch. In reality." She gave him a strange look, a flicker of worry in her eyes. "Michael, are you sure you're okay? You've been acting really off since that incident with Flight 712. He knew she was trying to be kind, but her words only reinforced his isolation. He couldn't tell her. Not yet. Not until he had more. He needed to find more. His quest for answers became an obsession. He spent every spare moment, both at work and at home, sifting through old flight logs, maintenance reports, anything even remotely connected to the airspace on that fateful day. He wasn't looking for another phantom edit. He was looking for anomalies, for anything that didn't quite fit, for the ripples left behind by whatever had caused the initial disturbance. He started focusing on the systems themselves, the radar, the communication lines, the backup protocols. If someone could manipulate a digital recording so flawlessly, what else could they do? Could they have interfered with the actual flight data? Could they have made Flight 712 disappear not just from his screen but from the actual sky? The thought was terrifying, pushing the boundaries of what he considered possible. One afternoon, while digging through archive system diagnostics from the week of the incident, he stumbled upon something peculiar. It wasn't an edit or a missing file. It was a series of low-level, almost imperceptible power fluctuations reported by a specific auxiliary radar station, designated Station Echo. These fluctuations were logged just hours before Flight 712 vanished. On their own, they meant nothing, a common occurrence easily dismissed. But what if they weren't? What if they were a signature? A footprint? He cross-referenced the coordinates of Station Echo with the last known position of Flight 712. The station was located in a remote, heavily wooded area, about 50 miles south-southwest of where the plane had disappeared. It was a secondary station, primarily used for redundancy and filling in gaps in coverage over difficult terrain. It wasn't the primary radar that had been tracking Flight 712, but it would have had peripheral coverage. He pulled up the maintenance history for Station Echo. The logs were sparse, mostly routine checks. But there was one entry about 3 days before the incident, for an unscheduled system update and calibration. The technician's name listed was David Miller. David was a quiet, unassuming guy who worked in IT support for the regional ATC network. Michael knew him casually. David was meticulous, almost to a fault. An unscheduled update seemed out of character for such a well-maintained, secondary station. And the timing felt too close to be a coincidence. Michael felt a surge of adrenaline. This wasn't a phantom edit, but it was a thread, a potential connection that didn't involve questioning his own sanity. He decided to find David. He found David in the server room, hunched over a blinking rack of equipment, his face illuminated by the green glow of indicator lights. "Hey, David," Michael said, trying to sound casual. David looked up, his glasses slipping down his nose. "Michael, everything all right?" "Yeah, just had a quick question about Station Echo," Michael began. "I was looking at some old logs, saw an unscheduled update around a month ago. You were listed as the tech." David frowned, a crease forming between his brows. "Station Echo? Unscheduled update? I don't recall that. I do routine checks there, but nothing out of the ordinary." He tapped his chin thoughtfully. "Are you sure it was me?" Michael felt a chill. "Yeah, the log clearly says D. Miller." David walked over to a terminal and typed rapidly. He pulled up the maintenance logs for Station Echo. Michael watched over his shoulder as David scrolled through the entries. Sure enough, there it was, 07/18/20XX, unscheduled system update and calibration tech, D. Miller. David stared at the screen. his expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. That's impossible. I was on vacation that week. My wife and I were in Florida. I distinctly remember because our flight was delayed. He pulled out his phone, quickly navigating to his personal calendar. See? July 15th to 22nd. Florida. Michael's heart pounded. This was it. Another crack in the facade. Not an edit in a recording, but an edit in official personnel logs. A phantom technician. Someone had falsified the record, using David's name, to perform an unscheduled operation at a critical radar station just days before Flight 712 vanished. David, Michael said, his voice barely a whisper. Who else has access to log these kinds of entries? Who could have used your name? David looked up at him, his face pale. Only a handful of senior network administrators. And they'd need my login credentials, or someone with higher clearance to override the system. He looked back at the screen, then at Michael, a dawning horror in his eyes. Michael, what is this about? Michael knew he had to be careful. He couldn't reveal everything, not yet. He just needed David to understand the gravity of the situation without implicating himself further. Remember Flight 712? The one that vanished? David nodded slowly. Of course. Everyone does. I think this unscheduled update at Station Echo might be connected, Michael explained, choosing his words carefully. I think someone might have tampered with that station, and they used your name to cover their tracks. David's eyes widened. Tampered? With a federal radar station? That's a federal crime, Michael. What kind of tampering? I don't know, Michael admitted. But if someone could do an update while you were on vacation, they could do anything. They could have installed something, altered something, and it happened right before the plane disappeared. David, usually so composed, looked genuinely rattled. But why? What would be the point of messing with a secondary radar station? It wouldn't make a plane disappear. Maybe not on its own, Michael conceded. But what if it was part of a larger operation? What if it was a piece of a puzzle, designed to create a blind spot, or to feed false data? He leaned closer, lowering his voice. David, this is bigger than just a clerical error. Someone went to great lengths to cover their tracks, to make it look like you were there. This means they don't want anyone looking too closely at Station Echo, or what happened there. And now that we might be in trouble. David ran a hand through his thinning hair. Trouble? What kind of trouble? The kind where people go to extreme lengths to protect their secrets, Michael replied, his gaze unwavering. The kind where they might have already tried to make me think I was losing my mind. The kind where they've falsified records not just once but twice now that I know of. David stared at the screen again, then back at Michael. The color had completely drained from his face. So someone broke into the system, used my credentials, performed an unknown operation at Station Echo, and then logged it under my name, knowing I was out of town? Precisely, Michael confirmed. And now we know about it. A sudden sharp ping echoed through the server room. Both men jumped. It was the system alert for a critical network intrusion. David's eyes darted to a monitor displaying real-time network activity. A red line, like a searing wound, was tracing a path deep into their internal database. It was targeting the very logs they had just been examining. Someone's trying to wipe the entry, David gasped, his fingers flying across the keyboard. They're trying to erase it right now. Michael felt a surge of adrenaline, cold and sharp. They weren't just being watched. They were being actively targeted. The whoever was here in their network reacting in real time. This wasn't a phantom. It was a living, breathing entity, protecting its secrets with ruthless efficiency. David furiously typed commands, trying to block the intrusion to save the evidence. But the red line on the screen moved with alarming speed, bypassing firewalls and security protocols as if they didn't exist. It's too fast, David muttered, his voice strained. They're already in. They're deleting it. Michael watched in horror as the entry 407/18/20XX, unscheduled system update and calibration tech, D. Miller flickered, then vanished from the screen. It was gone, erased, as if it had never existed. But it wasn't just that entry. David let out a strangled cry. My personal calendar. They're hitting my personal calendar files too. Wiping my vacation records. Michael's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about covering tracks anymore. This was about making sure there was no way to prove David was not there. It was about erasing the very possibility of an alibi. They were systematically dismantling any evidence that contradicted their fabricated reality. The screen flashed, then went dark for a moment before rebooting to the standard login screen. The red line was gone. The intrusion was over. The damage was done. David slumped against the server rack, his face ashen. "It's gone," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Everything. The logs, my calendar. It's like it never happened." He looked at Michael, his eyes wide with terror. "They know, Michael. They know we found it. And they just erased it. They just erased us." Michael stood frozen, the implications of what they had just witnessed washing over him. The phantom edit in the audio recording was child's play compared to this. This was a sophisticated, real-time attack, designed not just to hide a secret, but to warp reality itself around anyone who dared to question it. They had just poked the monster, and the monster had roared back, erasing their memories, their proofs, their very identities from the digital world. The stakes hadn't just been raised, they had been redefined. And now Michael wasn't just a target. He was a witness whose testimony was being systematically dismantled, piece by terrifying piece. He had to assume they would come for him next. Not just his data, but him. He was no longer just investigating a disappearance. He was fighting for his own existence against an unseen enemy that could manipulate reality with a keystroke. The game had just become deadly. The game had just become deadly. Michael felt a cold, paralyzing dread seep into his bones, a primal fear he hadn't known existed. His breath hitched, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Every shadow in his apartment suddenly seemed to stretch, to hold a hidden observer. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant city traffic, every sound was amplified, distorted into a potential threat. He was no longer just an air traffic controller trying to solve a puzzle. He was prey. His first instinct was to call someone, anyone, Jessica, David, but then the chilling realization hit him. His phone, his laptop, every digital footprint he possessed, had been compromised. His entire network, his digital identity, had been erased, rewritten, or perhaps even hijacked. Who was to say his calls wouldn't be intercepted, his messages monitored, his pleas for help twisted into confessions? The enemy wasn't just a hacker. They were a ghost in the machine, able to manipulate his very reality with a keystroke. He quickly moved through his apartment, checking windows, locking doors that were already locked, his mind racing. He was exposed, vulnerable. This wasn't just about data anymore, it was about his physical safety. They knew where he lived. They knew everything about him. The thought made his skin crawl. He needed to disappear, at least temporarily. He grabbed a small duffel bag, stuffing in a few changes of clothes, his wallet, and a burner phone he'd bought months ago on a whim, never expecting to actually use it. He had a hidden flash drive, a relic from his college days, tucked away in a hollowed-out book, a digital escape hatch he'd almost forgotten. It contained some old personal files, but more importantly, a few raw data logs he'd managed to extract from the ATC system before the full-scale digital assault. They were heavily encrypted, almost indecipherable, but they were his. He paused at his front door, his hand trembling on the knob. Stepping outside felt like walking into a trap, but staying inside, waiting for them to come for him, was worse. He took a deep breath, forced himself to calm his racing thoughts, and slipped out into the night. The city outside was a blur of neon and exhaust, a familiar landscape now imbued with a sinister aura. Michael felt eyes on him from every passing car, every darkened window. He hailed a taxi, giving a general direction, then changed his mind halfway through the ride, asking to be dropped off at a busy subway station several miles away. He paid in cash, avoiding any digital trail. On the subway, he kept his head down, scanning the faces of his fellow passengers. Were any of them watching him? Was that man across the aisle subtly taking his picture? His paranoia was a suffocating blanket, but he knew it was also a survival instinct. This wasn't just a feeling, it was a confirmed threat. He needed help, real help, from someone who understood the invisible war he was fighting. Someone who could see past the fabricated evidence, the digital smoke and mirrors. His mind went to an old friend from his university days, Alex Miller. Alex had been a brilliant, albeit rebellious, computer science major. He dropped out to pursue a career in ethical hacking and cybersecurity, working mostly off the grid, distrustful of large corporations and government systems. Alex was a digital ghost himself, living in the dark corners of the internet, making him the perfect person to fight another ghost. Michael knew Alex rarely stayed in one place for long, but he had a general idea of where Alex sometimes set up shop, a small, unassuming office above a defunct bookstore in a forgotten part of downtown. It was a long shot, but it was his only shot. He got off the subway several stops early, opting to walk the rest of the way, weaving through back alleys and dimly lit streets. He felt a strange vibration in his pocket, his old, compromised phone. He hadn't turned it on, but now it was buzzing. He stared at it, a knot tightening in his stomach. How? He hadn't activated it, hadn't connected to any network. He pulled it out and the screen, despite being off, flickered. A single ominous message appeared. Not a text, but a stark, glowing red word. Found. He threw the phone into a dumpster, the sickening thud echoing in the quiet alley. They weren't just manipulating data, they were manipulating devices that were supposed to be inert. This was beyond advanced hacking. It was a demonstration of absolute control. The realization sent a fresh wave of terror through him. They weren't just watching, they were playing with him, a cat toying with a mouse. He finally reached the address, a grimy brick building with boarded-up windows on the ground floor. A faint glow emanated from a window on the second story. He climbed the creaking stairs, his hand on the handle of the burner phone, ready to activate it only if absolutely necessary. He found the door, a heavy steel slab with multiple locks. He knocked, a series of specific taps he and Alex had devised years ago as a secret handshake. After a tense minute, the door opened a crack, revealing Alex's wary face, framed by unkempt dark hair and tired eyes that were perpetually scanning. Alex, looking exactly as Michael remembered him. A whirlwind of caffeine and code peered out. "Michael? What the hell? I thought you dropped off the face of the earth." Alex's voice was a low growl, but there was a flicker of genuine surprise and concern in his eyes. Michael pushed past him, shutting the door behind him with a relieved sigh. "I practically did, Alex. And I think someone's trying to finish the job." He quickly explained everything, from the vanishing plane to the digital assassination of his identity, the ominous found message, and the chilling realization that he was being hunted. Alex listened, his initial skepticism slowly giving way to a focused intensity. He walked around a cluttered desk, littered with monitors displaying arcane lines of code, half-eaten pizza boxes, and empty energy drink cans. He picked up a pair of glasses, perched them on his nose, and gestured to a worn armchair. "All right, Michael. Slow down. You're saying a plane just disappeared? And then your entire digital life was wiped? And now someone's sending you cryptic messages on a dead phone?" Alex ran a hand through his hair. "This sounds like a bad crypto thriller, man." "It's real, Alex. I swear to God. I have a flash drive, a backup with some raw logs from the ATC system. It's all I have left." Michael pulled out the hidden drive, handing it over. Can you make sense of any of this?" Alex took the drive, his fingers flying across his keyboard, connecting it to a heavily modified, air-gapped system. His expression grew serious as he started to analyze the data. Hours passed in tense silence, punctuated only by the rhythmic clicking of Alex's keyboard and the whirring of his computer. Michael sat on the edge of the armchair, every muscle taut, his mind replaying the terror of the past few days. Finally, Alex leaned back, a grim look on his face. "Okay, Michael. This isn't good. The encryption on these logs is something else. It's not standard government issue, and it's definitely not commercial. It's custom, highly sophisticated. It's like trying to read a blueprint designed by an alien civilization. But can you crack it?" Michael urged, hope and desperation battling in his voice. "Eventually, maybe. But the interesting thing isn't the encryption itself, or even the data in these logs. It's what isn't here. Or rather, what was removed before these logs were created." Alex turned a monitor to face Michael. "See these timestamps? There are gaps. Not just small, insignificant gaps, but precise, almost surgical deletions of data points. Someone went in, extracted specific information, then covered their tracks before these logs were even compiled. It's like they knew you'd be looking, knew you'd try to find something." "What kind of information?" Michael asked, leaning forward, his heart pounding. "That's the million-dollar question. But these gaps, they're not random. They correspond to specific moments, the 20 minutes before the plane vanished, and then a 5-minute window after it disappeared. when there should have been emergency protocols kicking in. Alex pointed to a series of glowing red markers on a complex timeline. And here's the kicker. I found a tiny, almost invisible digital signature embedded in the remaining metadata. It's like a watermark deliberately obscure. I've seen something similar, or at least heard whispers of it, in deep web forums. It's attributed to a clandestine organization, rumored to operate beyond the reach of any national government or intelligence agency. They call themselves the Architects. They're specialists in digital reality manipulation. Their entire existence is built on the idea of rewriting information, making things disappear without a trace, not just from the internet, but from the collective consciousness. Michael felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool night air. The Architects? So they made the plane disappear. But why? And why target me? That's the part one can't tell you yet. But the signature, it's not just a calling card. It's a breadcrumb. It points to a specific server farm, heavily fortified, deep underground, somewhere in the American Midwest. It's a digital fortress, nearly impenetrable. If anyone could hide a ghost plane, it would be them. Alex's voice dropped to a whisper, an undertone of awe and fear. But getting in there, it's suicide. Suddenly, the lights in Alex's office flickered, then died, plunging them into near-total darkness. The only light now came from the monitors, casting an eerie glow on their faces. The air crackled with an unseen tension. Then a low guttural hum started, growing louder, vibrating through the floorboards. It wasn't a distant sound. It was coming from within the building. What was that? Michael whispered, his eyes darting towards the door. Alex's face was pale, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. They found us. That hum. It's a high-frequency EMP. They're not just after data anymore, Michael. They're coming for everything. A chilling silence descended, not the peaceful kind, but the deafening absence of all the usual hums and whirs that defined Alex's high-tech sanctuary. The fluorescent lights above flickered violently, strobing the room in disorienting flashes before dying completely, plunging them into near-total darkness. Only the faint, dying glow of a server rack's indicator lights offered a ghostly luminescence, quickly fading into nothingness. MP, Alex breathed, his voice raw with a terror Michael had never heard from him before. He lunged across the room, his movements surprisingly agile in the sudden gloom, towards a reinforced panel on the far wall. Michael fumbled for his phone, but it was already a dead weight in his hand, the screen stubbornly black. The air grew heavy, crackling with an unseen energy, and Michael's skin prickled. What do we do? Michael asked, his voice barely a whisper against the oppressive silence. The hum, that insidious high-frequency drone, seemed to intensify, vibrating not just in the air, but deep in Michael's bones. Alex slammed his palm against a hidden button on the panel. A low, guttural groan echoed through the bunker as emergency power kicked in, bathing the room in a sickly red light from a single overhead bulb. It was just enough to see the panic etched on Alex's face, as he frantically typed on a small, ruggedized keyboard that seemed unaffected by the EMP. This bunker, it's shielded but not against something this powerful and sustained, Alex explained, his fingers flying across the keys. They must have deployed a localized, high-yield EMP device directly over us. It's frying everything that's not specifically hardened. My main systems are down. Communications are gone. We're blind, Michael. And they know exactly where we are. A metallic thud reverberated from somewhere above them, followed by a grating scrape. It was faint but unmistakable. Someone was outside, and they were trying to get in. They're here, Michael stated, the realization a cold knot in his stomach. Alex nodded grimly, pulling up a schematic on the small EMP-hardened screen. They're trying to penetrate the outer layers. This bunker has multiple redundancies, but if they've got a sustained EMP field, it's weakening the magnetic seals, making it easier for them to cut through. We don't have much time. He pointed to a section of the schematic. There's a service tunnel designed for emergency egress. It's narrow, unmonitored, and leads out about a quarter mile from here, into the old drainage system under the city. Drainage system? Are you serious? Michael asked, picturing rats and sewage. It's our only way out, Alex retorted, already moving towards a heavy camouflage door built into the wall. It's manually operated, so the EMP won't affect it, but it's going to be a tight squeeze, and will be exposed once we surface. He wrestled with a series of heavy bolts, the metal groaning in protest. Another thud, closer this time, vibrated through the floor. It sounded like a battering ram or worse, some kind of specialized drilling equipment. The red emergency light flickered ominously. "They're not messing around," Michael said, his hand instinctively going for the heavy wrench he'd seen Alex use earlier. "They never do," Alex grunted, finally throwing open the heavy door. Beyond it was a dark, cramped tunnel, barely wide enough for one person to crawl through. The air was stale metallic. "This tunnel was designed for me to disappear without a trace if things ever went sideways. I never thought I'd actually use it." He grabbed a small, rugged backpack from a hook near the door, tossing it to Michael. "Survival gear. Flashlights, water, a few energy bars. And this." Alex pulled a compact, but surprisingly heavy, pistol from a hidden compartment. "Just in case." He looked at Michael, his eyes grim. "You know how to use one of these?" Michael swallowed hard. "My dad was a hunter. Taught me when I was a kid. But I haven't touched one in years." "Good enough," Alex said, pressing the weapon into Michael's hand. The cold metal felt alien, heavy with responsibility. "We move fast. Don't stop for anything. And if you hear anything behind us, don't hesitate." These surge of grinding metal suddenly assaulted their ears, directly above them. The bunker shuddered violently, dust raining down from the ceiling. A section of the ceiling panel visibly buckled inwards. "They're breaking through the primary blast door," Alex yelled, pushing Michael towards the tunnel entrance. "Go. I'll follow right behind you." Michael didn't need to be told twice. He squeezed into the dark aperture, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and old concrete. He clicked on the flashlight from the backpack, its beam cutting a shaky path through the oppressive darkness. The tunnel was even narrower than he'd imagined, forcing him to crawl on his hands and knees. The rough concrete scraped against his palms, and the low ceiling pressed down on his back. He heard Alex scrambling in behind him, sealing the heavy door with a series of clunks and thuds. The sounds of the breach above them were muffled but still terrifyingly present, a constant reminder of the danger they were fleeing. "Keep going," Alex's voice urged from behind him, echoing eerily in the confined space. The tunnel slopes downwards for a bit, then levels out. There are a few turns. Just follow the path. It's a straight shot to the exit point. Michael crawled, his muscles screaming in protest, the air growing heavier with each breath. The darkness beyond his flashlight beam was absolute, a suffocating void. He tried to focus on the small circle of light, on the immediate task of moving forward, blocking out the image of the men, whoever they were, breaking into Alex's bunker. What would they find? What were they truly after? A sudden thought chilled him to the bone. The data, the drive they had recovered from the mysterious crash site. Alex had specifically mentioned they were after everything. Had he managed to secure it? Or was it still on one of his now-dead systems? "Alex!" Michael called back, his voice hoarse. "The drive. Is it safe?" There was a moment of silence, then Alex's strained voice. "It's on a dedicated offline server. EMP hardened and shielded. But if they get into the core of the bunker, they can still access it. That's why we have to get out. We need to get this information to someone who can make it public. Someone they can't silence." The urgency in Alex's voice spurred Michael on. He pushed harder, ignoring the burning in his shoulders and knees. The tunnel twisted, then turned sharply, disorienting him further. He could feel the cool, damp air of the drainage system growing closer. Suddenly, a faint, rhythmic thump-thump-thump started ahead of them. It was subtle at first, barely perceptible over his own ragged breathing, but it grew steadily louder, more insistent. "Did you hear that?" Michael whispered, twisting his head to look back, though he could only see Alex's flashlight beam behind him. "Hear what?" Alex replied, his voice tight. "A thumping sound," Michael said, his heart beginning to pound. "Up ahead." Alex went silent for a moment. Then his voice came back, laced with a new, terrifying edge. "It might be the pumps for the drainage system. They're old, but they're still active. We're getting close to the main conduit." But it didn't sound like pumps. It sounded deliberate, like footsteps. Heavy, measured footsteps, echoing strangely in the confined space. Michael's mind raced. How could anyone be ahead of them? Alex had said this tunnel was unmonitored, an emergency escape. The thumping grew louder, closer. It wasn't a steady mechanical rhythm. It was irregular, punctuated by slight scuffs and scrapes. And then he heard it, unmistakable through the stale air, a low guttural grunt. Someone was in the tunnel, coming towards them. "Alex," Michael whispered, his blood turning to ice. "It's not pumps. Someone's in here. In front of us." Alex swore under his breath. "Impossible. This tunnel is sealed from the drainage side. It's a dead end unless you know the access code to the manual lock." But the sounds were undeniable. The thumping grew into heavy, approaching footsteps. The air in front of them seemed to grow colder, heavier, as if an unseen presence was drawing near. Michael gripped the pistol in his hand, the cold metal a stark contrast to his suddenly sweating palm. His flashlight beam, trembling slightly, illuminated a faint, dark shape coalescing in the distance, just at the edge of his vision where the tunnel made a slight bend. It was large, too large to be a normal person. They knew, Michael realized, the words catching in his throat. They knew about the escape tunnel. They sealed it off from the other side. Or they had someone waiting. Alex didn't respond, but Michael could feel the sudden tension in the air behind him, the rapid, shallow breaths of his friend. The approaching shape grew clearer, resolving into a hulking figure, silhouetted against the absolute blackness of the tunnel. It wore what looked like heavy, tactical gear, and its face was obscured by a dark visor. And in its hand, Michael could just make out the glint of metal. "Michael, we have to turn back," Alex hissed, panic creeping into his voice. "They've cut off our escape." But turning back meant facing the breach in the bunker. They were trapped between two unknown, hostile forces. The figure in front of them took another heavy step, and the thumping stopped. It was waiting, watching. Michael's heart hammered against his ribs. He raised the pistol, his hand shaking, pointing it blindly towards the looming shadow. He had never shot anyone in his life. He didn't even know if he could. "Who are you?" Michael yelled, his voice cracking, but he stood his ground. "What do you want?" The figure remained silent, a silent, menacing sentinel in the oppressive darkness. Then, slowly, deliberately, it raised whatever it was holding. It wasn't a gun. It was a long cylindrical device, and from its end, a single blindingly bright beam of light erupted, momentarily stunning Michael and forcing him to shield his eyes. Before he could react, a high-pitched, piercing whine filled the tunnel, so intense it felt like his skull was being split open. It was a sound designed to disorient, to incapacitate. Michael crumpled, dropping the pistol, his hands flying to his ears, trying to block out the agonizing noise. He could hear Alex groaning behind him, equally afflicted. The beam of light intensified, cutting through the darkness like a surgical laser, and Michael could feel a terrifying heat radiating from it. He knew with a horrifying certainty that this wasn't just a device to stun. This was a weapon, and they were its next targets. Michael's instincts screamed at him. Before he could even process the full terror, Jessica reacted. Her hand shot out, grabbing his arm with surprising strength, yanking him sideways with a force that sent them both stumbling behind a stack of rusted, cylindrical containers. The laser beam, a crimson spear, sliced through the air exactly where Michael's head had been moments before. It didn't just pass. It vaporized the concrete wall behind them in a burst of superheated dust, and a smell like ozone and burnt metal. A section of the wall simply ceased to exist, leaving a jagged, smoking cavity. This wasn't just a weapon. This was devastation. "Stay low," Jessica hissed, her voice a tight whisper, her eyes scanning their surroundings with the predatory focus of a seasoned hunter. The air crackled, the lingering heat from the beam a physical presence. Footsteps echoed, growing closer, heavy, deliberate. They were being hunted. Michael's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure adrenaline. He could feel the tremor in his hands, the cold sweat on his brow. "What is that thing?" "Doesn't matter right now," Jessica muttered, peering cautiously around their makeshift cover. "All that matters is getting out." Another beam of crimson light lanced out, striking one of the cylindrical containers they were hiding behind. The metal shrieked, glowing white-hot for a split second before rupturing with a muffled boom, releasing a cloud of acrid, chemical-smelling vapor. The force of the blast rocked their hiding spot, sending shards of metal ricocheting. "We can't stay here," Michael yelled, coughing from the fumes. Jessica nodded, already moving. She grabbed his arm again, pulling him deeper into the labyrinthine facility. "They want us alive, or they wouldn't be using a weapon that incinerates everything. They're trying to flush us out." Her logic, chilling as it was, made a terrible kind of sense. If they wanted them dead, they would have been vaporized already. But why? What did they know? They moved quickly, scrambling over debris, ducking under low-hanging pipes, the echoing footsteps and the ominous hum of the laser weapon always just behind them. The air grew thicker, colder in some sections, warmer and humid in others. This place was vast, a subterranean maze built for a purpose Michael couldn't yet fathom. They rounded a corner, plunging into a section of the bunker that seemed untouched by the decay of the main chamber. The walls here were smooth, paneled with an unfamiliar metallic alloy, and a faint rhythmic pulse resonated from deep within. Ahead, a heavy circular door, reinforced with multiple locking mechanisms, stood slightly ajar, emitting a soft bluish light. "In here," Jessica ordered, pushing the door open wider. It moved silently, smoothly, as if recently oiled. They slipped inside, Jessica quickly but carefully closing the door behind them, not latching it, but just enough to obscure their entry. The room was a control center, pristine and shockingly modern amidst the surrounding dereliction. A bank of screens hummed, displaying complex schematics and lines of incomprehensible data. A large holographic projection table dominated the center, currently showing a spinning, intricate three-dimensional model of the crystalline device they had found earlier. Michael's eyes widened. The crystal, it's what they're studying? Jessica moved to a console, her fingers flying over a holographic keyboard. Or what they're using. Her gaze swept over the data. This isn't just a device, Michael. This is a power source. A massive one. Look at these energy readings. The sheer scale of the numbers on the screen was staggering. This crystal, small enough to hold, generated enough energy to power a small city, perhaps more. But for what purpose? Suddenly, a voice, calm and detached, filled the room. It wasn't coming from the console, but from a small wall-mounted speaker. Asterisk intruder alert. Section Gamma. Unauthorized access detected. Asterisk. Jessica cursed under her breath. Motion sensors. We tripped them coming in. The footsteps outside were drawing closer again, accompanied by muffled voices. They were cornered once more. There has to be something here, Michael said, frantic, his eyes darting around the room. Something that tells us what this is all about. Why Flight 702 vanished. His gaze fell upon a small, illuminated panel on one of the consoles. It displayed the familiar, intricate symbols he'd been seeing. The ones that haunted his dreams. The ones etched onto the crystalline device. They weren't just decorative, they were part of an interface, a language. The symbols, Michael whispered, pointing. I've seen these before. In my visions. On the crystal. Jessica looked at the panel, then back at Michael, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. You're connected to this, aren't you? Somehow. Before they could delve deeper, a loud thump echoed from the circular door. Someone was trying to force it open. Quick. Search for anything. Data logs, reports, anything. Jessica urged, pulling up more screens, her frustration evident. Michael frantically scanned the console, his fingers brushing over the holographic controls. He saw a log icon and instinctively pressed it. A new screen popped up, displaying a list of dated entries. The most recent one, dated just a few days before Flight 702's disappearance, caught his eye. Project Kronos Phase 3 activation. He clicked on it. A video file began to play, showing a stern-faced man in a lab coat, speaking directly to the camera. His name, Dr. Elias Thorne, was displayed below. Asterisk log entry, Project Kronos, Cycle 47. Phase 3 activation is scheduled for T-24 hours. The primary objective remains the stabilization of the Kronos field for localized temporal manipulation. Our calculations indicate a 98.7% chance of success in achieving a stable, contained anomaly. The energy requirements are immense, necessitating the full output of the Ethereum core. The crystal you see before you. Asterisk. The video shifted, showing the crystalline device, pulsing with an inner light, connected to a vast array of machinery. Michael recognized the symbols from the console, now glowing on the machinery itself. Temporal manipulation? Michael breathed, his mind reeling. Time travel? They were trying to manipulate time. Dr. Thorne continued, his voice devoid of emotion. Asterisk. While minor disruptions to the local space-time continuum are anticipated, significant collateral damage is projected to be minimal. We have established a flight path exclusion zone, though standard air traffic is still a concern. The potential benefits of Project Kronos far outweigh any minor risks. Imagine a controlled ability to adjust the timeline. The implications are staggering. Asterisk. A banging on the door intensified. Michael could hear the metallic groans of the reinforced steel straining against whatever force was being applied. They didn't have much time. Jessica was simultaneously trying to access other files, her face grim. They weren't trying to time travel, Michael. They were trying to manipulate time, to change things. And Flight 702 was caught in the crossfire. The video log continued, now showing Dr. Thorne looking more stressed, bags under his eyes. This entry was dated the day after Flight 702 vanished. Asterisk log entry, Project Kronos, Cycle 48. Catastrophic failure. The Kronos field destabilized during Phase 3 activation. The containment protocols, they failed. The anomaly expanded beyond acceptable parameters. We lost everything. The entire section of airspace around the facility simply ceased to exist for a brief, horrifying moment. Flight 702. It was in the predicted exclusion zone, but the field expanded. It was caught in the temporal cascade. Asterisk. Michael felt a cold dread spread through him, colder than any fear he'd felt before. His breath hitched. It wasn't just a glitch. It was a cascade. Asterisk. The plane didn't crash, it didn't explode, it didn't just vanish from radar. Asterisk. Dr. Thorne's voice was now laced with a chilling tremor. Asterisk. It was displaced, ripped from its own timeline. We don't know where or when. The raw energy signature left behind. It's unlike anything we've ever seen. We've been ordered to initiate full Project Chimera protocols, containment, evidence destruction, and asset relocation. Asterisk. Asset relocation? Jessica mumbled, her eyes glued to the screen. That's what they call silencing witnesses. Dr. Thorne paused, visibly shaken. Asterisk. And the residual effects, the temporal echoes. Some personnel are reporting strange phenomena, distorted perceptions, recurring symbols, a persistent feeling of unreality. It seems the Kronos field left a permanent imprint, especially on those who were closest to the event, the air traffic controllers, and perhaps even the passengers themselves, if any survived. This isn't just a cover-up anymore. This is a desperate attempt to prevent global panic. Asterisk. The video log abruptly cut off. The circular door suddenly buckled inward with a deafening screech of tortured metal. A section of the outer seal gave way, leaving a gaping hole. They were out of time. They're not just trying to stop us from exposing them, Michael said, a new horrifying realization dawning on him. They're trying to prevent us from becoming another temporal echo. They're trying to prevent the Kronos field from spreading further, from destabilizing our own reality. Jessica's eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of terror and grim determination. And you, Michael, you're the strongest temporal echo they've encountered. That's why you've been seeing the symbols. That's why they are here. They need to contain you, or eliminate you. The laser beam, now visible through the broken door, was focused, charging. This time it wasn't just to flush them out. It was to erase them. There has to be a way out, Michael said, his voice strained. He looked at the holographic projection of the crystalline device, then at the symbols on the console. What if the symbols? What if they're not just an interface? What if they're a key? He remembered the feeling, the connection he'd felt to the symbols, to the crystal. It was more than just observation, it was almost recognition. He reached out, his hand hovering over the holographic projection of the crystal, then tracing a sequence of the symbols on the console that seemed to correlate with the flow of energy he saw displayed. The console hummed, a low resonant tone. The holographic crystal pulsed, brighter than before. The circular door was now visibly warping under the relentless assault from outside. Any second it would burst open. "What are you doing?" Jessica asked, her hand moving to her side, instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. "I don't know," Michael admitted, a strange calm washing over him, replacing the panic. "But I think the Kronos field didn't just displace the plane. I think it left something behind, something that connects me to it. And maybe, just maybe, I can use that connection." He pressed the final symbol in the sequence. The room vibrated. The crystalline device on the holographic projection pulsed with an intense, blinding light. And then, without warning, the entire control center plunged into darkness. The hum of the consoles died. The holographic projection vanished. The only light now was the ominous, charging red glow of the laser weapon seeping through the mangled door. The silence was absolute, broken only by the thudding of Michael and Jessica's hearts and the terrifying certainty that whatever Michael had just done, he had either just sealed their fate or opened a door to something far more dangerous than they could ever imagine. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen energy, and Michael felt a familiar, dizzying pull, not through space, but through something far more profound. The familiar ground beneath Michael's feet dissolved into a sickening lurch, not like a drop, but a stretching, twisting sensation that pulled at his very atoms. His vision blurred, colors bleeding into a swirling vortex of light and shadow, and a high-pitched hum vibrated through his bones, a sound that seemed to originate from the deepest parts of his own consciousness. It wasn't just his body that felt disoriented. His mind struggled to anchor itself, grasping at fragments of reality, like trying to catch smoke. Emily's startled cry, David's sharp intake of breath, Jessica's whispered gasp, all became distorted echoes, swallowed by the overwhelming surge of whatever force had just consumed them. Then, mercifully, came the darkness, a soft, velvet curtain that offered a momentary respite from the assault on his senses. He surfaced slowly, his head throbbing, a metallic taste coating his tongue. The hum was gone, replaced by an unnerving silence. For a long moment, he lay still, eyes closed, trying to process the lingering echoes of the transition. When he finally dared to open them, a new world, or perhaps just a subtly altered version of the old one, greeted him. The first thing he noticed was the light. It was different, not brighter, not dimmer, but possessing an ethereal quality, as if filtered through an invisible lens. The shadows seemed deeper, more profound, yet the overall illumination felt diffused, lacking the sharp edges of natural sunlight. He pushed himself up onto his elbows, his muscles protesting with a dull ache. He was still in the same clearing, or at least a clearing that looked identical in its layout. The same gnarled trees, the same damp earth, the same faint scent of pine and decay. Yet everything felt sharper, more defined, yet less real, like a photograph brought into unnerving focus. He looked around frantically. Emily was a few feet away, pushing herself up, her face pale, eyes wide with a mixture of terror and scientific fascination. David was on his hands and knees, shaking his head, groaning softly. Jessica sat upright, clutching her knees to her chest, her gaze fixed on something just beyond Michael's line of sight, her expression a mask of profound disbelief. "Michael!" Emily's voice was a shaky whisper. What just happened?" He struggled to find his own voice. I don't know. A shift. A pull." He looked down at his hands, then at the device. It lay inert on the ground, its strange metallic surface now dull, the faint glow gone. "The device, it's off." David finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "Off? Or depleted? What did it do? Where are we?" He pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly, his eyes scanning the tree line with the practiced wariness of a man who'd seen too much. Jessica slowly pointed a trembling finger. "Look." They all followed her gaze. Through the gap in the trees, where the sky should have been a familiar blue, there was a faint, shimmering distortion. It was subtle, like heat haze rising from asphalt, but it pulsed with an almost imperceptible rhythm. And beyond it, barely visible, was something immense and dark. "Is that a cloud formation?" Emily ventured, her scientific mind grasping for a rational explanation. But Michael knew it wasn't. The distortion had a geometric quality, a faint, almost invisible grid, and the dark mass beyond it was too uniform, too unnatural to be a natural phenomenon. It was vast, stretching across the horizon, blotting out whatever lay beyond. "No," Michael said, his voice flat. "That's not a cloud. That's a wall." A wall of what, he couldn't say. It seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, an endless expanse of absolute blackness. As they watched, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the ground. The air, which had been still, now carried a faint, almost subliminal hum, a deeper, more resonant vibration than the one that had accompanied their transition. This wasn't a sound, it was a feeling, a pressure against their eardrums, a buzz behind their teeth. "The coordinates," Emily murmured, pulling out her own, smaller GPS device. She stared at the screen, then looked up, her face etched with confusion. "They're gone. The device isn't registering a signal. It's like we're nowhere." "No, we're somewhere," David countered, his eyes narrowed. "Just not somewhere, that is." He turned to Michael. "Your plane. The one that vanished. Do you feel anything? Any residual connection? Michael closed his eyes, trying to reach out, to sense the ghost of Flight 374. But there was nothing. The familiar phantom echo, the faint whisper of its last coordinates, was utterly absent. It was as if the plane had never existed, or as if he had never existed in the reality where it had. Nothing, he confessed, opening his eyes, a cold dread settling in his stomach. It's blank. Jessica, who had been silent, finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. My husband. Michael, what if we're in the same place he went? What if this is where the plane is? The question hung heavy in the air, a chilling possibility. They had chased the anomaly, pursued the ghost of Flight 374, and now it seemed they had become part of it. Suddenly, a new detail snagged Michael's attention. On the ground, near where the device lay, was a small metallic object. It was a fragment no larger than his thumb, of what looked like polished aluminum. He picked it up. It was impossibly light, yet felt solid. And etched into its surface, barely visible, was a series of symbols. Not letters, not numbers, but intricate angular patterns, unlike anything he had ever seen. Emily knelt beside him, her scientist's curiosity overriding her fear. What is that? It looks familiar yet alien. It's part of something, Michael said, turning the fragment over in his fingers. But what? David, ever the practical one, ran his hand over the bark of a nearby tree. The trees, they feel different. The texture, it's almost too perfect. Like a render. His words sent a shiver down Michael's spine. A render. As if they were inside a simulation, or a meticulously crafted illusion. He looked back at the vast, dark wall on the horizon, then at the shimmering distortion in the air. It was like looking at the edge of a canvas, or the boundary of a carefully constructed set. And then a sound. Faint at first, a distant, almost imperceptible thrumming. It grew steadily, a low resonant vibration that seemed to emanate from the ground itself. It wasn't a natural sound but mechanical, powerful, yet strangely muted, as if heard through layers of thick glass. What is that? Jessica gasped, her head swiveling, trying to pinpoint the source. The ground began to vibrate more intensely, a deep bass note that resonated in their chests. The trees around them, which had seemed so still, now subtly swayed, not with wind but with the unseen force. And then from the direction of the dark wall, a light appeared. A single piercing beam, impossibly bright, cutting through the diffused illumination of this altered reality. It swept across the landscape, methodical, deliberate, like a searchlight. It's looking for something, David muttered, his hand instinctively going to the small knife he carried. The light beam was moving slowly towards them. As it drew closer, they could discern its source. A vast, dark shape, moving silently above the tree-line. It was massive, utterly devoid of any discernible features. A monolithic form that seemed to defy the very concept of flight. No wings, no engines, no visible means of propulsion. Just a colossal, silent entity, gliding through the air. Its single beam of light systematically sweeping the ground below. That's not a plane, Emily whispered, her voice filled with a new kind of awe and dread. Not like any plane we know. Michael felt a surge of adrenaline, cold and sharp. This wasn't just a new dimension or a pocket of altered reality. This was something else entirely. Something was here. Something was in charge. The vanished plane, the strange device, the coordinates. They were all pieces of a puzzle that was far grander and far more terrifying than he had ever conceived. The light beam was closer now, its intensity forcing them to squint. They were exposed, standing in the middle of the clearing, caught in its relentless sweep. There was no cover, no escape from its scrutiny, and as the silent, dark Leviathan drew nearer, Michael had a terrifying realization. They hadn't just stumbled into the unknown. They had stepped into a meticulously maintained system, a place where the rules of their reality no longer applied, and where they were now, undeniably, intruders. The plane that vanished, the coordinates that led them here, they weren't anomalies. They were entry points. And whatever dwelled here, whatever commanded that silent, sweeping beam of light, knew they had arrived. The hum intensified, vibrating through Michael's very core, a silent warning that they were no longer simply observers, but subjects in a game they didn't understand, a game with rules that could rewrite their very existence. The hum intensified, vibrating through Michael's very core, a silent warning that they were no longer simply observers, but subjects in a game they didn't understand, a game with rules that could rewrite their very existence. It wasn't just a sound, it was a physical force pressing against their skin, rattling their teeth, a low resonant thrum that seemed to emanate from the very bedrock beneath them. Jessica clapped her hands over her ears, her brow furrowed in pain, while David, ever the stoic, simply gritted his jaw, his eyes scanning the desolate landscape around them with an unnerving intensity. "It's getting stronger," Jessica yelled, her voice barely audible above the pervasive throb. "It's like a power surge but without the electricity. Pure kinetic energy." Michael felt a strange pull, a disorientation that tugged at his sense of balance. He remembered the brief, terrifying temporal shift he'd experienced weeks ago, the fleeting glimpse of a world askew. This hum, he realized, was intrinsically linked to that anomaly. It was the background radiation of whatever force had orchestrated the disappearance of Flight 701. David pointed towards a jagged ridge, barely visible through the twilight haze. "It's coming from there. There's something built into the rock face." As they moved closer, the hum escalated from an oppressive presence to an almost unbearable assault. Their footsteps crunched on loose gravel, each step bringing them nearer to a revelation they instinctively knew would shatter their understanding of reality. Embedded within the natural contours of the mountain, almost perfectly camouflaged, was a massive, reinforced door. It was a marvel of engineering, a seamless blend of rock and polished, dark metal, utterly devoid of handles or visible seams. "How do we get in?" Jessica whispered, her voice strained. The hum made her feel like her skull was vibrating apart. David ran his gloved hand over the cold, smooth surface. "No conventional lock. No keycard reader. It's either sealed shut or designed to be opened with something unconventional." He pulled out a small, specialized scanner from his pack, a device he'd picked up from his black market contacts, usually used for bypassing high-security alarms. He ran it along the doorframe, a series of complex readouts flickering across its small screen. "Bingo," he muttered, a grim satisfaction in his tone. "It's responding to a specific frequency. A resonant frequency, actually. This door isn't locked with a bolt. It's held by some kind of harmonic field." Michael felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "A harmonic field? Like the hum?" David nodded, already adjusting the scanner's output. "Precisely. Whoever built this place understood how to manipulate energy at a fundamental level. If we can match the frequency, we might destabilize the field just enough." He pressed a button, and a high-pitched whine emanated from the scanner, momentarily cutting through the pervasive hum. A faint ripple, like water disturbed, spread across the metal door. Then, with a low, grinding groan that sounded ancient and mechanical, a hairline crack appeared, slowly widening until the massive door slid inward, revealing a cavernous, pitch-black maw. The hum inside was 1,000 times more intense, a suffocating blanket of sound and pressure. It felt like walking into the heart of a giant living machine. They pulled out their tactical flashlights, their beams cutting through the oppressive darkness, revealing a long, sterile corridor of brushed steel. The air was cold, stale, and carried a faint metallic tang, like ozone after a lightning strike. "This place, it's been abandoned for a while, but it feels like it could wake up at any moment," David observed, his hand resting on the holstered weapon at his hip. They moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing strangely in the resonant space. The corridor stretched endlessly, punctuated by heavy, blast-proof doors and occasional, flickering emergency lights that cast long dancing shadows. Michael's heart hammered against his ribs. He felt a profound sense of foreboding, but also an undeniable pull, a certainty that the answers he sought, the truth about Flight 701, lay waiting within these steel walls. They eventually reached a central chamber, vast and circular, dominated by a towering cylindrical structure in its center. It pulsed with a faint, internal light, and the hum here was deafening, making conversation impossible. Around the periphery of the chamber were multiple control stations, each equipped with an array of outdated, but incredibly complex consoles. Jessica immediately gravitated towards one, her fingers flying over the dusty keypads. "These systems, they're unlike anything I've ever seen. It's advanced, but in a way that feels almost alien. Like a parallel technological evolution." She tapped a few more keys and a dormant screen flickered to life, displaying lines of cryptic code and complex schematics. Michael, meanwhile, was drawn to a larger central console that seemed to monitor the pulsating cylinder. As he approached, a holographic display shimmered into existence above it, depicting a swirling vortex of energy. And within that vortex, fleetingly, he saw it, the faint, distorted outline of a jumbo jet. Flight 701. His breath hitched in his throat. "Jessica! Look!" he shouted, but his voice was swallowed by the hum. He pointed frantically at the hologram. Jessica looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and dawning comprehension. She rushed over, her gaze fixed on the image. "My God! It's a temporal displacement field. Or a dimensional one. This facility, it was designed to create these anomalies." She quickly returned to her console, furiously typing. Data streamed across her screen, faster than Michael could follow. "Project Kronos," she read aloud, her voice strained. "Operational logs, experimental phase. Targeting coordinates. Wait, this is it. This is the incident log." As she spoke, a series of images flashed across the main holographic display, synchronized with the text on her screen. They showed the facility's central cylinder powering up, the energy vortex growing, and then a critical error message: field instability. Containment breach imminent. And then a timestamp precisely matching the moment Flight 701 vanished from radar. "They weren't tracking it," Jessica gasped, her face pale. "They caused it. This facility opened a rift, accidentally or intentionally, and Flight 701 flew right into it. The plane didn't crash, Michael. It was displaced." David, who had been standing guard, now approached, his eyes fixed on the terrifying data. "Displaced? Where? To another time? Another dimension?" Jessica shook her head, her fingers still flying across the console. "The logs are incomplete. They lost all telemetry after the initial breach. But there's a recurring anomaly signature, a residual energy pattern. It's what we've been tracking. It's like an echo of the event, a tear in the fabric of reality that never fully closed." Michael stared at the ghostly image of the plane within the swirling vortex. The faces of the passengers, the crew, they weren't gone in a fiery explosion. They were simply elsewhere, trapped. The guilt that had gnawed at him for months now transformed into a burning resolve. He had to find them. He had to close that tear. Suddenly, the hum intensified again, a piercing high-frequency whine that made their bones ache. The emergency lights in the corridor flickered erratically, and then one by one died out, plunging the facility into near-total darkness, save for the pulsating light of the central cylinder and the dim glow of Jessica's console. On the holographic display, the vortex image began to swirl faster, more violently. "The system's reactivating," Jessica cried out, her voice filled with a fresh wave of panic. "It's drawing power from the residual anomaly. It's trying to destabilize the rift, or perhaps open it again." A new message flashed across the console, stark and terrifying. "Reinitiation sequence active. Target lock acquired." Below it, a set of coordinates began to scroll, followed by a countdown timer that read 00:05:58. Michael's blood ran cold. "Target lock? What's it targeting?" Jessica frantically typed, her eyes wide with horror as she deciphered the data. It's targeting this location. It's attempting to recalibrate the field, to re-establish the displacement event. It's going to open another rift, right here, right now." The central cylinder began to hum with a new, terrifying energy, the light within it growing exponentially brighter, casting their shadows long and distorted across the chamber. The very air around them crackled with static electricity, making the hairs on their arms stand on end. They were no longer just investigating a vanished plane. They were standing at ground zero of a temporal or dimensional gateway, and it was about to reactivate, with them caught directly in its path. The game, Michael realized, wasn't just about finding the truth. It was about surviving the very forces that had ripped Flight 701 from existence. And the rules of this game were about to be rewritten not just for them but for everything they knew. The game, Michael realized, wasn't just about finding the truth. It was about surviving the very forces that had ripped Flight 701 from existence. And the rules of this game were about to be rewritten not just for them but for everything they knew. He felt a cold dread seep into his bones, a feeling far more profound than any fear of death. It was the fear of unreality, of the ground beneath his feet crumbling into nothingness. He was no longer just an air traffic controller haunted by a ghost plane. He was a witness, a conduit, perhaps even a part of the anomaly itself, The men in suits weren't just pursuing him, they were observing, studying, perhaps even herding him towards a predetermined revelation. Michael knew he couldn't keep running. He had to confront them, or more accurately, confront the truth they held. His mind raced, connecting every fragmented vision, every whispered echo, every impossible detail. The specific frequency, Dr. Reed's missing research, the temporal distortions, the feeling of the plane existing in multiple moments simultaneously. It all pointed to something that defied physics, something that warped the very fabric of existence. He stopped his car abruptly on a deserted road. The city lights a distant blur in his rearview mirror. He knew they were watching. He could feel their invisible eyes on him, a constant pressure in the back of his skull. He took a deep breath, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "All right," he whispered to the empty car. "Let's play." He drove to the one place he knew they wouldn't expect him to go. His old apartment, the place where the echoes had first begun, where the ghost of Flight 701 still seemed to linger in the air. He walked into the silent building, the familiar scent of stale coffee and old carpet comforting in its normalcy, a stark contrast to the chaos in his mind. He sat on his couch, his eyes scanning the empty room, waiting. It didn't take long. A soft click at the door, then it swung open. Agent Miller stepped in, followed by two other figures Michael hadn't seen before. But it was the woman who entered last who commanded his attention. She was impeccably dressed, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her eyes sharp and intelligent, yet holding a weariness that spoke of years spent grappling with unfathomable secrets. This wasn't a field agent. This was the architect of his torment. "Michael," she said, her voice calm and authoritative, yet with an underlying note of something akin to sympathy. "I'm Director Thorne. We've been expecting you to come to us." Michael met her gaze, refusing to flinch. "You've been expecting me to break, you mean? To lead you to whatever you think I've found?" Director Thorne allowed a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "You haven't just found it, Michael. You've become inextricably linked to it. You are, in essence, our most valuable sensor." She gestured to the empty seat opposite him. "May we talk?" Michael nodded, a strange sense of resignation settling over him. This was it, the final act. Thorne sat, her posture as rigid as her resolve. Miller and the others remained standing, silent, watchful. "Flight 701, she began, did not crash. It did not explode. It did not simply vanish into thin air. It became unmoored." Michael frowned. Unmoored from what? From linear time. From singular reality. Thorne explained, her voice dropping to a low, almost conspiratorial tone. Dr. Evelyn Reed, brilliant as she was, stumbled upon something she didn't fully comprehend. Her research into unique resonant frequencies wasn't just about communication or energy. It was about the fundamental vibratory nature of space-time itself. She found a frequency, a specific harmonic, that, when amplified under precise conditions, could induce what we call a temporal shimmer. Michael felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. A temporal shimmer? Imagine reality as a tightly woven tapestry, Thorne continued, her eyes never leaving his. Most of the time it's stable, predictable. But there are underlying threads, echoes of other possibilities, other moments, other states of being. The frequency Dr. Reed discovered, for a fleeting instant, caused the weave to loosen, creating a localized instability. Flight 701, by sheer horrific chance, flew directly into that instability. "So it just jumped?" Michael asked, the words feeling inadequate for the enormity of the concept. "Not precisely a jump," Thorne corrected. "More like it ceased to exist in a singular point in time and space. It became an echo, a ghostly presence flickering across multiple potential timelines, its physical manifestation dissolving and reforming in infinitesimal, asynchronous moments. It is everywhere and nowhere all at once, a perpetual whisper in the fabric of what we perceive as reality." Michael's mind reeled. This explained the fragmented visions, the conflicting radar data, the feeling of the plane being both present and absent. It explained the temporal echoes he'd been experiencing. "And I heard it," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You didn't just hear it, Michael," Thorne stated, leaning forward slightly. "You were uniquely attuned. The trauma of that night, combined with your proximity to the initial incident, altered your neurochemistry. You became a receiver, capable of perceiving these shimmers, these echoes of unmoored reality, where others simply see a void. You are living proof that the world isn't as solid as we believe. And you've been watching me because of this, Michael said, the pieces clicking into place. You're not trying to cover it up, not entirely. You're trying to understand it, to control it. We are Aegis Prime, Thorn revealed, a flicker of pride in her weary eyes. An organization established decades ago, dedicated to monitoring and, if possible, containing phenomena that threaten the stability of consensus reality. We've seen glimpses of these shimmers before, minor distortions, localized anomalies. But Flight 701 was the first catastrophic, undeniable manifestation. A crack in the foundation of everything. You want to fix it? Michael asked, a glimmer of hope. Thorn's expression grew grim. Fixing it is beyond our current capabilities. The frequency, once unleashed, resonated through the very structure of time. Flight 701 is not merely lost. It is a permanent scar, an open wound in reality. What we want, Michael, is to prevent it from happening again. Or perhaps to understand how to navigate this new fragile reality. And what do you want from me? Michael challenged, knowing the answer was about to change his life forever. Your perception, Thorn replied, her gaze intense. You see the world as it truly is, a tapestry unraveling at the seams. You can perceive the echoes, the temporal anomalies, the places where reality thins. We need you to help us map these instabilities, to predict them, perhaps even to understand how to close them, or to weaponize them, Michael countered, his voice flat. Thorn didn't deny it. Knowledge, Michael, is merely power. How it's used depends on who wields it. But I assure you, our primary objective is the preservation of a stable reality for the vast majority of humanity, who are blissfully unaware of the precipice upon which we stand. What if I refuse? Michael asked, though he already knew the answer. Thorn's expression hardened. Michael, you are an anomaly, a living, breathing link to a truth that would shatter human civilization. You cannot be allowed to wander freely, disseminating this knowledge. You would either be contained for your own safety and ours, or we would ensure your silence. Permanently. The air in the room grew heavy, the unspoken threat hanging between them. Michael looked at Miller, at the other agents, seeing not malice, but a cold, unwavering resolve. They believed they were protecting the world, even if it meant sacrificing his freedom, his sanity. He thought of Jessica, of David, of the life he'd lost, the life he could never return to, the simple comfort of ignorance. That life was gone. He had seen too much. He knew too much. He was no longer just Michael, the air traffic controller. He was something else entirely. So the game, Michael said, a bitter taste in his mouth, is no longer just about finding the truth. It's about living with it, about choosing a side in a war for reality itself. Thorn nodded slowly. Precisely. The rules have been rewritten, Michael, and you are now one of the players. Michael closed his eyes, picturing the ghost of Flight 701, flickering in and out of existence, a silent scream across the dimensions. He saw the faint shimmer around the edges of his vision, the subtle distortions in the patterns on his couch, the almost imperceptible tremor in the air. He was seeing it all now, not just the plane but the underlying instability of everything. When he opened his eyes, they held a new kind of resolve, a chilling acceptance. All right, Director Thorn, he said, his voice steady. Tell me what you want me to do. But understand this. I will not be a pawn. I will not be a tool. I will be a witness. And if you ever deviate from your stated goal of protecting humanity, if you ever seek to exploit this shimmer for power, I will be the first one to expose it, even if it means shattering the very reality you claim to protect. Thorn studied him for a long moment, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes, respect, perhaps, or a renewed weariness at the burden of her own choices. A witness, then, she finally conceded. But a witness under our guidance. We have ways, Michael, to help you navigate this new perception, to hone it, to understand its implications. But it will change you irrevocably. Michael looked out the window, at the city lights that seemed to shimmer just slightly more than before, at the distant stars that now felt like mere pinpricks in an infinitely fragile canvas. He knew she was right. He was already changed. The world he knew was gone, replaced by a terrifying, beautiful, unstable truth. Flight 701, the plane that vanished from radar, was not an isolated incident. It was a harbinger, a tear in the fabric of the universe. And Michael, the air traffic controller who had once merely guided planes through the sky, was now tasked with navigating the shifting currents of reality itself. The game had truly begun, and its stakes were nothing less than existence. He was entering a new world, one where the whispers of other realities were always just on the edge of hearing, and the line between what was real and what was merely perceived was forever blurred. He had survived the truth, but the real challenge he knew was living within it.